Hi, my name is Billy Wilson, and the book I chose was The Deerslayer by James Fenimore Cooper. At first glance, I thought this book was super boring, but after reading it and actually doing this presentation, I was enlightening and I was enlightened, and it was a good book. I really enjoyed reading it, and like I said, there were some views in this book some views that are seen today, like racism and just not liking somebody because they're different from you. And especially in the world, literally in this instance right now, I mean, it was so relatable. But before we hop in the story, let's talk about a little bit more about James Fenimore Cooper. James Fenimore Cooper was born on September 15th, 1789 in Burlington, New Jersey. His mother was a respected Quaker, and his father served as a congressman for George Washington and John Adams. So his father and that name Cooper had some respect behind it. He would eventually move to New York. During his younger days, he didn't attend public schools. He was a private school kid, and that eventually led him to graduate and enroll into Yale. So that tells you what type of scholar he was. He enrolled in Yale from 1803 to 1805. He was eventually expelled for the prank he did in college. They didn't really specify on the prank, so I didn't want to speculate. But after leaving Yale, he enlisted in the Navy. And a couple of years in the Navy. After resigning in the Navy in 1811, he married his wife, Susan Delancey. 10 years in marriage, he decided he wanted to be a writer. And shucks, he went to Yale, so I'm pretty sure he was smart. I'm pretty sure that probably was a talent of his. So his first book he published was Precaution in 1820. And his second book was really, when he really blew up, The Spy. Gave him the international spotlight and fame. And the cool thing about Cooper, he used his war experience in his writing. And most of his books, he used just different life experience of his. Like in The Spy, he used American Revolutionary War. And I thought that was pretty cool. So here's the presentation. Cooper was the first major American novelist. He went on to write sequels, and one of his famous lines of books is the leather stocking tales. One of his famous works is actually The Last Mohicans. I'm pretty sure y'all have heard of that. In 1841, he wrote The Deerslayer, the book I'm talking about. Very interesting book. And in the 1840s, he began to make the switch from pure fiction to a mixture of controversy and art. So that's what really got people really talking and noticing who he really was as a writer. During his older days, he felt the competition between younger writers and himself. So he wrote more in this period of his life than he ever did. So it's like the first half of his writing career, he wrote, but it wasn't as consistent. In the second half, he wrote constantly to keep up with the competition. Cooper passed away on September 14th, 1851 in Cooperstown, New York. What a coincidence. And he was buried in Christ Episcopal Churchyard. So there we go. Sorry, it's hard to record yourself and let me see. So we're going to talk about the plot. It starts off Natty Boompo, other known as Deerslayer, and Hurry Harry walk through the forest, engaging in a conversation on the way to Thomas Hutter's floating house or his boathouse. Upon arrival, they're greeted by Hetty and Judith. Those are Thomas's daughters, who we will later meet in the story. After making the decision to scalp some Indians, scalp is what they use, like that's their word of killing or murdering. they try to get Deerslayer to go with them, but as you read the story, Deerslayer is a kind-hearted Christian, and he wasn't about really killing anybody, so he refused to go. The Mingos, the Indian tribe, they capture Harry and Thomas, and the Deerslayer actually has to put his Christian beliefs aside and murder a man to go save his friends. Then Deerslayer meets Chingachgook. He's actually the leader of the tribe, and they go. Judith and Deerslayer, Thomas's daughter, Judith and Deerslayer, look for random things in Thomas's ship and chest to give. They made like a barter, a trade to get the prisoners back, which was his two friends. After being freed, Thomas and Harry plan to attack some Indians again, but it never happens because the Indians eventually move away. While attending to save Chingachgook, Deerslayer is kidnapped by the Mingos again. Deerslayer is freed. Thomas is scalped and passes away. Deerslayer is captured once again after returning to pass through the trial of knives, which was an interesting part of the story. Harry and a group of soldiers from garrison kill majority of the Mingos. Hetty gets hurt and dies. This story's all over the place. And Deerslayer and Chingachgook go back to the lake a decade later and recollect the events from the past. This story was really good. I really enjoyed it. It was kind of violent. I wouldn't recommend younger readers to read it, but it was really good to me. Here is actually an image. Many people don't know that they actually made the Deerslayer. Later made it a comic book. It was published in 1944 by Classic Comics. It was an adapted literary classic, and their goal was to expose younger people to the classic literature through popular medium, like a comic book. Comic books, they really didn't have TV back then, or TV at all, so comic books was their TV, so they wanted to expose young readers. The characters in the story: Natty Bumppo, other known as Deerslayer. He's a brave, young, honorable person filled with innocence, and he later, like I mentioned, he later loses that innocence from killing a man or forced to kill a man to save his friends. Chingachgook, he's a Delaware chief, a friend of Natty Bumppo, other known as Deerslayer. Harry March, he's other known as Hurry. He's greedy and self-concerned. Thomas Hutter, he's an old pirate. He has the floating house or the boathouse, and he tries to be a hero and join Harry to kill some Indians, but he winds up dying. Judith Hutter is Thomas's daughter. She's shrewd and like Deerslayer, she's unlike Deerslayer, she's self-concerned. Hetty Hutter, Thomas's daughter, she's the total opposite of her sister. She's considered simple, and she's a Christian. She's more like Deerslayer. And Wadawa, Chingachgook's fiance, she is captured by Indians but eventually escapes but returns to help Deerslayer. So those are the characters. They actually made some films, a couple of films of this story. First one in 1913, starring Harry T. Morey. Next, 1920, it was a German film with Bela Lugosi. 1943, starring Bruce Kellogg and Gene Parker. 1957, starring Lex Barker and Rita Moreno, the most famous one. In 1990, they had a Soviet version. So that's a little fun fact about the book. A lot of films made, so this was a prominent work, and it still lives on today. The literary era and the movement. Deerslayer was published almost a century after the time period it portrayed. So Deerslayer becomes a book about rituals and manhood. We watch Deerslayer become a man after killing, after being innocent and actually having to kill a man to save his friends. Around this time was actually the French and Indian Wars. It was published during a time where colonial America required determination and grit to survive. The author Cooper was a liberal in Europe, and that shaped his writing. That was a time of the revolutionary ferment in Europe. In his works, Deerslayer, he would often attack problems and corruption in society. So basically, if he's seen racism, that's why he talked about it. And his principle of political democracy also shaped his writing. So literary era and movement. This is actually a picture of him in his later stages of life. There we go. The themes. There was a couple of themes. You got nobility. Deerslayer was a noble warrior, and he would put himself in danger to defend his friends. For example, he got captured to save one of his friends. He even killed a man to save one of his friends. So he was very noble and trustworthy. Religion and nature is also a theme in this story. Deerslayer is a Christian, and he believes who expresses himself throughout the story, and he believed that faith should be held within nature. And another theme in this thing, like we talked about, is racism. Harry was a very racist man with a racist mindset. He was a white man who hated Native Americans and felt that he was better than them. So that was the themes. Symbolism. Deerslayer symbolized reason and smart choices. He was a thinker. He was very rational. Harry symbolized impulsiveness and the need to have a reaction to everything. And the Mingos symbolize wilderness. And like the wilderness, it may be dangerous, it may be beautiful or majestic, but it's unexplored. And a lot of times when stuff is unexplored, it gives people fear. And that's exactly what the Mingos did. People didn't get the time to know them, so they thought they were savages, and it gave a lot of people fear. And that's why Harry hated them. Here's the movie art from 1957. Actually, the most famous movie that there is of this work. My evaluation of this book was very interesting. It started off kind of slow, but it picked up after a while. The story does not end the way you expect it to. The book tells a story of manhood and making sacrifices for the people you care about. There's an example of this when Deerslayer went out and married a man to attempt to save Harry and Tom. Even though Harry and Tom weren't good people, he put his life on the line. He even murdered a man to save them. It was a good book and gave many lessons. One of the lessons it gave was sacrifice and nobility. And the only critique I give this book is the racism. And I mean, that's pretty much everywhere nowadays. And that's my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'm kind of all over the place. I have a headache. I'm sorry. But it's kind of hard recording yourself and talking, so I did the best I could. But hope you guys enjoyed. I put a lot into this, and God bless.